message. So, I want to give you my love is. And a lot of those love is things were based on 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 to 7. Here are the biblical love ises. Love is the greatest commandment. I never read that on one of those love is things. It takes special revelation to give us all of this. Love is the greatest commandment. Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40. Mark 12, verses 28 through 34. Other places show that this was understood by the people of Israel. Those are two doctrinal statements of that truth. There are other passages in the New Testament that show that the people understood this to be true. Luke 10, verses 25 to 28. Where the implication here is that the people understood that love lies at the very heart of revealed religion. Love occupies the very heart of revealed religion. Christianity is a religion of love. See, think of Islam. That's not a religion of love. Buddhism, Shintoism, Christianity is a religion of love. So love is the greatest commandment. Love is, secondly, the mark of a true disciple. John 13:35. First John 3:14. Matthew 5, verses 44 and 45. Love is, thirdly, the greatest Christian grace or virtue. Colossians 3:12 to 15, 1 Corinthians 13. Now let's go back. I've got a few more passages to give, but let's go back and look at this and see what the Bible says about love is. You ask yourself the question, what is love? What is love? Love is. Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40, love is the greatest commandment. We're just going to turn all of you into little love bugs out there.
Praise God.
Oh, we're going to convict some of you too. You're going to go home loving your husband and wife tonight? Oh my.
Hallelujah.
They want to do something that you normally wouldn't want to do, you'll say, oh, praise God. I better watch out where my wife is, what she wants to do tonight. But when the Pharisees had heard that he put the Sadducees to silence, these dupes didn't know anything about love. They were gathered together. And one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, saying, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. He didn't ask him for a second, notice. But Jesus saw them as inseparable. And John points it out in 1 John 4, verses 20 and 21, that you cannot love God and not love your brother. That's an impossibility. If you love one, you will, by definition, love the other. So he sees love for God and love for one another as being inseparable, although the man asked only for one response here. What is the great commandment? Not the two great commandments. But Jesus really sees them as one, although they are distinguished. by description as well as by the terms first and second. First, verse 38, second, verse 39. The second is likened to it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, one relates to God, that one we've already discussed. One relates to your neighbor, and of course that's what we're on in ethics now, responsibilities to one another. What's your greatest responsibility to your neighbor is to love him. Not to be long-suffering, not to be kind, not to be forbearing, not to be forgiving. None of those come ahead because they all come under love. On these two commandments, and this was just what flabbergasted the Jews, hang all the law and the prophets. Do you mean on that hangs what I can eat in the morning and what I can't eat? And Jesus said yes. They had noticed all these other things in the law and had left the weightier matters of judgment and mercy and faith. They had left those matters. They had left the subject of the love of God as well. On that hangs, think of all that's in the Old Testament. And he says all of that back there, all of Leviticus, Genesis, all of the prophets, all about Babylonian captivity, all of the law and the prophets, he said, hangs on these two commandments, to love God and to love your neighbor. You couldn't ask for a more powerful statement than that. If you want to know how to be and where to be guided in your life, how to be guided and where are you going. If you're not going toward one of these two pegs here, then you're not going toward the law, the prophets, or the apostles, we could say, because they came teaching the same message as Moses and the other prophets, the law and the prophets. These, he said, are the two pegs upon which all of the law and the prophets, and now for us, the apostles, hang. Mark 12 gives it to us in a little different fashion, verses 28 through 34. One of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked them, which is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. In Luke 10, verses 25 through 28, it was understood to be the great law by the people. 25 to 28. Behold, they just didn't understand the outworkings of it. That's where they were missing it. Behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said, What's written in the law? How readest thou? He answering said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Well, he got that himself. You see, this is a different occasion than over there in Matthew and Mark. Matthew and Mark, they asked him and he told them. Here Jesus asked the man. He's got the answer. The Jews knew of it, but they didn't do it. They didn't know the outworkings of it. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy neighbor, with all thy soul. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, he got the second part too. He says, go and do this and you'll live. But see, notice he didn't understand the outworkings of it. But he asked, who is my neighbor? We'll be back to that passage later. We said love is, secondly, the mark of a true disciple. We'll be to all of these passages later, by the way. This is just an introductory look in these first messages. John 13:35. It's the mark of a true disciple. It's like a brand that we are to carry upon our person. Or more to the point, upon our personality. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. When he said a new commandment, I thought we just saw that was the old commandment of the Old Testament. Well, we need a lot of interpretation and teaching on things like that. What does he mean by that? A new commandment. That was the old commandment. That ye love one another, as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. And by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. We're going to give you some early quotes from the early church writings and what they had to say about the mark of Christianity in their days. The mark of Christianity was not this, that, or the other, And I'm going to avoid the temptation to digress on faith being the mark of it, the faith message, because it wasn't for them. The mark of their discipleship was their love, and that's what Jesus predicted here. All men will know you're my disciples. What did we quote from J.C. Ryle? They understand our love and our humility even when they don't understand our faith, the doctrinal aspects of Christianity. When they see you as a person who knows how to love, what is love? We'll get to that later. Practice humility. You already know that. Humility in thought and meekness in deed. When they see that, that speaks. You ever heard your actions speak louder than your words? That speaks to other people. And there's a whole theological, Christian, biblical, Old and New Testament phrase book and manual right before them, and it's your life that's an open book to them, in your love and in your humility manifested in meekness. 1 John 3:14. We said love is, secondly, the mark of a true disciple. We know that we have passed from death unto life. That means we know that we're a true disciple because we love the brethren. That's very similar to Jesus' teaching earlier. It's a mark of a true disciple. Matthew 5, verses 44 through 45 set this apart as being a mark of a child of God. Therefore, a true disciple. You've heard that it hath been said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Love was the theme. Love your enemies. That ye may be the children of your Father, which is in heaven. I mean, he's saying that manifests your sonship, your discipleship to the world. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Thirdly, we said love is the greatest Christian grace or virtue. Let's read 1 Corinthians 13. I know we're going a little long, but 1 Corinthians chapter 13. You can really get into preaching messages with some of these things here that we really all need to hear to transform our lives. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, speaking in tongues, that's what he's talking about, speaking in tongues. He just discussed that in the earlier chapter, and he goes on in the next one to speak of it. Though I speak in tongues and have not love, I am become as sounding brass or tinkling cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, your Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Moses, Elijah combined. And though I have all faith, take the apostles and the great faith they manifested, so that I could remove mountains and have not love, I am nothing. See, he says if you're Moses, Elijah, Paul, Peter combined and don't have their love, then you're nothing. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. Love suffereth long, well, there's long suffering. Love is kind, well, there's kindness. Love envieth not, it vaunteth not itself, it's not puffed up. There's humility. Doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. It beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love never fails. Whether there be prophecies, they will fail in the sense of the next term. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease, fail in the sense of cease, not fail to come to pass. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. So that's nothing to be, too boastful about, that you can prophesy or that you know anything, because what you know or prophesy is so insignificant. It's so in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Some people never do, but Paul did. For now we see through a glass darkly, But then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know, even as also I am known. What's our point? Love is, thirdly, the greatest Christian grace or virtue. And now abideth faith and hope and love, these three sister virtues. But the greatest Christian grace or virtue is not faith or hope, but it's love. Colossians 3, verses 12 to 15. Put on, therefore. We've gone through all of these virtues now, the put-ons, virtuous put-ons. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, a heart of pity, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, forbearance, forgiveness, forbearing one another, forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as the Lord forgave you. And above all these things, put on love. It's the greatest Christian grace or virtue. Above all of these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfectness. That's what makes all of the other things perfect and complete. It holds everything together because everything else is just a subordinate to this tremendously significant concept of love. It's been said by some people in the past that what wisdom was to the ancient philosophers, love is to the Christian disciple. They just magnified wisdom, wisdom, wisdom. And what wisdom was to the ancient world, the Greek philosophers, love is to the Christian disciple. It's the bond that holds together all of the other virtues, as we are told here. Without it, we're nothing. 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 2. I've got one other verse jotted down, Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 17. That Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith. We read there in Colossians 3:15 that it is the bond of the other virtues, what holds them together, that ye being rooted and grounded in love. That again, that's just another way of saying that this is the ultimate of the graces or the virtues. And it's the third from last of the ones that we'll study. I would have made it last, but I have some others that go in the next category, and that's why this one could not be last. Or you could say you could start with it first, because it is the ground, the soil from which the other virtues spring. Maybe in looking at what love is, we need to at the same time look at what love is not, according to the Scriptures. Let's look at what love is not. And I'll take the title from one of Finney's books, Love is Not a Special Way of Feeling. I've always liked the title of his work, and I think that depicts it rather clearly there. Love is not a special way of feeling. You know, we talk about getting these warm feelings. You go back to your courtship days, this warm feeling, generally accompanied by knees that shake, starry eyes, hands that perspire. I didn't mean to describe my wife so clearly there. So what do we say? We say that person is in love, as though love were like a phone booth or something, that you are in it. That person is in love. But love is really not a special way of feeling. What those things are, starry eyes, shaky knees, and sweaty palms, is what you would call those things, not love. But a lot of people call something like that. They think that those things are love, but how often is that really puppy, quote, love, end of quote? You see, you find out it wasn't really love, because what do you read in 1 Corinthians 13? Love endures all things. Even those heartaches that you and your girlfriend experience. And how could you ever break up if it's love? Love endures all things. Love never ends. Love never fails. Whether it be prophecies, they will fail, cease, tongues, they'll cease, knowledge, it'll pass away. Love never ends, never comes to an end. Love never ceases. So love is not, and I guess I should say not just a special way of feeling, or I really should say love is not a special way of feeling. Love can be accompanied by certain types of feeling. But then again, what if you don't have those feelings, though? Do you honestly have those feelings every day of the year for your father, mother, son, daughter, for your spouse? Do you honestly have those feelings all the time? Then does that mean that love ceased there? You see, one thing might accompany another on occasions, but you can't equate the two, or then when you don't have those, you don't have love. And by necessity, when you do have love, you must have the other. And we know from experience that's not always necessarily so true after all. So love is not a special way of feeling. Love is not, secondly, the relationship between yourself and that pork chop on your plate. Here's what I mean by that. My father had this little saying, and I guess it's fairly true, whenever we were growing up, that he felt we used the term love too loosely. Why? You sit down, you eat, I loved that meal. Well, isn't that in a different ballpark between what you feel about your pork chop and what you feel about your wife? She may be on the pork chop side, but what you feel about her and what you feel about the food, they're in different ballparks, though. I love this type of ice cream. I love that sport. I love. We would have to understand, I'm not advocating the cessation of the use of love in that context, but we would have to understand it's being used extremely, extremely loosely. What would better fit there, and what my father always recommended, is to use the word like. You like a pork chop, you love a human being. You like this, that, or the other type of food or recreation or hobby, but when it comes to love, love can only be expressed between people. And I think that he's right, between people and God. Can you really have a love for your favorite? It might be your favorite dogwood tree in the yard? Not really, it's just a tree. What about even your animal? It's just a beast. The spirit of the beast goes downward. The spirit of man goes upward, Ecclesiastes said, upon the death of both of them. Love your beast, just a beast. Man's closest friend is a dog. No, it's either his wife or his best male friend is his closest friend, not his dog. The person is strange if that's your closest friend. Love is not, these cover some relatively big areas. Love is not sex. The popular current American euphemism is making love. King James Day, it was knowing. Is that what you're really doing? How do you make love? What type of ingredients? What size is the bowl? How much vanilla in there? Making love. It's a euphemism, is what it is. And I'm saying that for an important purpose here. It can be an expression, it is an expression of intimacy, but intimacy is not a synonymous term for love, though. It's just intimacy. And there are other purposes and there are other reasons behind the act of marriage than just expressing intimacy. You get children from that. I would call it making children if you want to call it anything. It's let's make children, although sometimes you don't want them to come right then. So then you say, let's make love. Well, love is not sex, and sex is not love. Now, you might have known sex is not love. You might not have known love is not sex. Or you might have thought love is not sex, but you didn't know that sex was not love. That's a euphemism that maybe would be difficult to get away from. You would date yourself to talk about knowing someone. You would date yourself too far in time, Euphemisms, as we've already discussed in Bible translations, are almost necessary in any cultured society. You have to use a euphemism, a current one hopefully, that will adequately express what it is you're speaking of. So I won't get into suggesting what other things could be used for that particular act, but making love, I don't think, is the best euphemism for that. So many people make love, and they're not even married. So I don't know if I would call that making love then. I'd call it fornicating or practicing adultery, making love, but yet they're doing the same thing that you're supposed to do whenever you get married. So making love, love is sex, sex is love. I can't say the two don't go together, but they're not synonymous, neither the terms nor the concepts behind that. And what I was going to say a moment ago, what I began saying was it's an important distinction because of the fact some people think that sex, even in marriage, would be wrong. Maybe if we're Christians, we'd say unspiritual then, if in any way it's an expression of anything besides love. In other words, the only time and the only manner and method and way in which it could be done, the only atmosphere is one where there is a lot of, quote, love, end of quote. Well, if there's a whole lot there, you don't need to make it then. You've already got it, so you wouldn't need to make it then. But that's what they say. Only when there's a lot of it there are you supposed to make it, which is contradictory as far as I'm concerned. But we'll get into that, of course, in a lot more detail later on. But we're on what love is not. Love is not a special way of feeling. Love is not an item, a thing out there, food, sports. I love this, I love that. Love is not sex, sex is not love. Love is the greatest commandment, the mark of the true disciple, the highest Christian grace or virtue. You know, whenever I first started into the work that I had to do on these messages for love, I just compiled pages and pages and pages before finally realizing, or finalizing, I should say, the route that we would take in this study. So let me begin here in one of these early messages on love, kind of outlining for you what route we will travel, because it's difficult to know. It's difficult whenever you're first sitting down with a concept as broad as love. L-O-V-E. Some people spell it L-U-V. As broad as love, to really know where you're going. So I've divided up into these areas. First of all, just some introductory remarks and messages. And that should probably take us the first 2 or 3 messages, I would say. First of all, we'll look at some introductory remarks, and basically that will concern the subject love is. What is love? What love is not? What love is not, and then how can we define a concept like love? Is there any definition that can even be given to the concept of love? Then secondly, we'll look at biblical terms, concepts, Greek concepts of various words and terms about love. We'll look in much detail the well-known Greek words you've heard of: phileo, eros, agape, the agapao words, and lots of well, I better save all that for itself. Lots of interesting, pop misunderstandings. If anyone knows anything about Greek, they think they know the 3 Greek words for love, and one of them expresses erotic love, and one of them expresses brotherly love, and one of them expresses true Christian love. And then this is just the way that it is, and that's the way it always has been, and it is, and it always shall be. Well, there are many lay misunderstandings. I mean lay, by lay I mean lay people out there who aren't trained, who don't really know what they're talking about. Misunderstandings about concepts. And there are many more Greek words than just those 3 terms anyway. With the phileo words, there are just several score compounds with that term, most of which are found right in the New Testament. So that will get very, very technical, but we'll have to look at that. All of the various concepts, all of the various terms that are used. Well, I'm really tempted to look ahead, see where we're going here.
For the continuation of the
Well, I'm really tempted to look ahead, see where we're going here. Oh, the compounds, the words. We'll look at statistical studies for all of these Greek terms, many Greek terms. And those three are three important ones. The agapao words and the phileo words are the two chief ones. The eros words are not that important, but misconceptions, because we think of gods and goddesses named that, and erotic love and erotic images and erotic literature, and so we have a bad connotation in America today with the term erotic, and that's not necessarily original, nor is it necessarily true. So we'll look, secondly, after going over some of these introductory things, we'll look at the terms. You ought to be a scholar by the time we're through, where the terms are found in ancient Greek literature, how far they date back to, how often they're found in the Septuagint, which Hebrew words, although we won't really get into Hebrew that much, the LXX translators use certain Greek words to translate, what type of meaning they have in the LXX versus in classical Greek versus in the Koine Greek of the New Testament. Meaning change between the LXX usage of the agapao words and how they're used in the New Testament, agape, verbs and nouns and things of that nature. A lot of biblical terms and concepts and in much detail of the well-known Greek words. And then thirdly, and we'll spend a lot of time with that. Maybe most of our time will be spent in the third category, probably so. So we're working our way up in extent of time. The least amount of time here in introducing the subject of love. Second most important things and length of time will be spent with biblical terms and concepts. And then finally, we'll select various passages and do further study in passages that relate to Christian ethics. And so let me give you some examples of what we'll do here in this third category that you can kind of be thinking ahead on. Because we're gonna have every single solitary love word in the New Testament studied. I don't promise, although I'm not for sure, there's so many of them, hundreds of them, I don't promise we'll look at every verse where they're found, but it'll all be summarized under certain categories. And here's what I mean. If you look in Romans chapter 13, we'll pick certain passages that depict certain concepts, and we'll do further detailed study that relates to Christian ethics. Here in Romans 13, verses 7 through 10, we have the notion, as Paul expresses it here, that love is the fulfilling of the law. Now we're all familiar with that phrase, that love is the fulfilling of the law. But what in the world does that mean? What law is he talking about? How does love fulfill the law? It's a question that few people can answer, although many people are familiar with the terminology. Render therefore, I'm reading Romans 13:7, to all their dues, and by the way, we'll do a study of this verse in the intertestamental period class here before too long because it's a taxation verse. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. Owe no man anything. Of course, that means no bank loans, credit cards, things of that nature. But to love one another. I'm smiling if you can't see me. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Now that's a different stating of it than what we'll see down in verse 10. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. We know it's important to fulfill the law. He wouldn't be saying here that a Christian is a fulfiller of the law unless it is important, and we're told here the avenue, the means by which the law is fulfilled, and he said love. Well, how through love? I mean, if that fulfills all of the law, that's pretty important then. fulfills all of the law. And the whole New Testament is based on the Old. And the Old is based upon the law of Moses, if that's what law he's talking about. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, kill, steal, covet. If there be any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. We'll be to that little statement here in just a moment. Verse 10, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, here's his conclusion to this little section from 7 to 10. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Now, we're told in verse 8, he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law, and the phrasing is different now. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. But what if you love one day and then you don't love the next day? Then what happens? Did you then not fulfill the law, and your earlier fulfillment the day before is now canceled? So there's one idea. It's over in Galatians. This is found in many passages of the New Testament, of love and the law. How do love and the law go together? Let's see, I'll have to find it. It's in chapter 5, beginning with verse 13. Galatians 5, beginning with verse 13. Now see if this doesn't sound like important teaching. For brethren, see, we're on brother to brother. We just finished brother to brother forgiveness. We're on brother to brother relationships here. Virtues from you toward another person, not God. You've been called unto liberty. We use this earlier in ethics in the liberty teachings. Only use not your liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. What did he say? The law is fulfilled in one word. Now the phrasing is different. Every single time when it says fulfillment of the law, the phrase is always different. He that loveth hath fulfilled the law. Love is the fulfilling of the law. All the law is fulfilled in one word, and that word must be love. He gives us a half a dozen here, but the one word must be love. It's one commandment. Verse 15, but if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. We'll read on a little. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh, works plural, of the flesh are manifest, which are these. King James says adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and such like. Of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit, now it's singular, works of the flesh versus fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is, first of all, and not without reason, does he begin with love. The fruit of the Spirit is love. Joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faith, meekness, and self-control. And then look at this phrase, against such there is no law. Well, what does he mean? Sometimes it's the easiest passages that give us the most difficulty, because it's not like you can go search out the ancient manuscripts. You have to come to some understanding based on internal considerations. Against such there is no law. There's no law against love, no law against joy, no law against peace, no law against the fruit of the Spirit. That's what he said, but the question is, what does he mean? And they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. And then right there in the next verse, we get into the brother-to-brother forgiveness business, because here go and restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, one who stumbles and falls. So there's one example of what we'll look at in the third category of our studies here in love, where we'll select certain passages that are thematic in nature, and then discuss the other passages that come under the same theme. And I'm seeing this in these passages as we turn through here, another important idea in the New Testament is the love thy neighbor as thyself passages. Romans 13:9, we just saw it there. The Galatians 5 passage, verse 14, we just saw it there. Mark 12 and verse 31. Here, we've seen that earlier here in this teaching. What's the greatest commandment? Love God with all your heart. And the second is like unto it. Mark 12 and verse 31. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And then you'll find this repeated in several other passages in the New Testament. Okay, how do you want to explain something like that? What type and how much of it, of self-love, is biblical, is scriptural? Self-love. Self-love. Men are lovers of themselves rather than lovers of God. That's a sign of the apostasy of the Christian, to be a lover of yourself. Lovers of pleasures as well as lovers of themselves more than lovers of God. And yet here we're told to love your neighbor as yourself. Now you have to supply in, is what he's saying here, love your neighbor as you love yourself. You have to add that in. He just says love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Treat your neighbor as you. Love your neighbor as you, yourself. Or love your neighbor as you love yourself. You can get two different meanings from that then. And if you're one of these practicing too much of self-hatred, how could you ever love your brother then? Then you would have to hate your brother with the same hatred with which you hate yourself. How could you love your brother with your own personal hatred? You know, you hate yourself. Hate your life in this world, that type of idea, that type of meaning. You hate yourself. Well, then how can you ever love your brother? But then what about these classes that tell us, when you get up in the morning, stand in front of the mirror and say, you're gorgeous. You're beautiful. The world's been missing you. For the last 8 hours now, the world has been perishing without you. You know, these pump yourself up self-help things. You know, that's self-love there. Narcissism is what they call it. Well, how much of that is biblical? Did you do that this morning? Have you done it lately? Stand and say, you're beautiful, in the mirror. Not to the mirror now, because you see yourself in there. You don't ever say the mirror's beautiful unless it's got maybe too much dust on it and you're glad your wife cleaned it, but you're looking at yourself there. You're beautiful. The world is really missing out on a treat. I think I told you that brings to mind this humorous story. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I think I've told it to you before, of the beautiful girl who had just won a beauty pageant here, there, and the other, and told her friend, I wonder how many men will be miserable whenever I get married. Her friend says, that depends on how many men you marry. She meant something different by that, of course. All the men of the world will be missing her. How many will be miserable once I get married? Her friend said, it depends on how many you marry. Whoever you marry will be miserable, was her point. So, love as the fulfilling of the law. Love thy neighbor as thyself. What's another concept of love in the New Testament that's just found again and again and again? Love as the new commandment. It's another concept that's found particularly in John's writings. Let's look at a few places. What does he mean here? Love as the new commandment. I don't know if we're supposed to have the anointing in these post-Holy Spirit days, but I do just discussing these things here. John chapter 13 and verse 34. Passage we looked at earlier as well. John 13:34. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. Well, See, the problem with that is that all these other passages, whenever they come before him in Matthew 21, I believe, there in Mark 12, and ask him, what's the great commandment? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And he's quoting from the Mosaic Law. So that's not a new commandment. That's the old commandment from the Old Testament law. Okay, then if you kind of keep your finger there, and then you want to really get confused, jump over to 1 John chapter 2, and beginning with verse 7. These are some of the passages that we will do much discussion of and about and around later on, once we get past knowing what all the words are and where they're found. You see that many times they're just universally translated, uniformly translated as love, where maybe it's a phileo word, maybe it's an agapao word, and yet they give it to us as love anyway. We have to know what type of word it is, generally speaking, to know what type of love he has reference to. Okay, now see if this doesn't throw a wrench in your engine. Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment, which ye had from the beginning. Now keep watching. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment. Well, we can't say again, because again means I'm doing it now and I just did it previously. He just said in the previous verse, I don't write a new commandment to you, but I write an old one. And so again, he would have to say, again, I write no new commandment to you, but an old one. But he doesn't say that now. Again, a new commandment I write unto you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. John's a mystic, if there ever lived a mystic. John's a mystic in the way he expresses things. It's beautiful what he says, but it has to all be interpreted here. Brethren, I write no new commandment unto you. So he must be out of line with Jesus' teaching in John 13:34. And he wrote John 13:34 in his gospel, this same John. But an old commandment which ye had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which ye have heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write unto you. And this thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is past, and the true light now shineth. What's John's concept of love? John's whole first epistle here, and his second and third are laced with it as well, revolves around the concept of Christian love. It revolves around the concept of Christian knowledge. The word know is probably the most important word. The verb know in the epistle. It appears, I don't know, several score times. No, 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 no. K-N-O-W, not N-O. We can start off right there in verse 3 of this chapter. Hereby we do know that we know him. He that saith, I know him. Verse 5. Hereby know we that we are in him. Verse 11. And knoweth not whither he goeth. Verse 13. I write unto you, fathers, because ye have known him. The end of that verse. Ye have known the Father. The next verse. Because ye have known him. Verse 20. Ye know all things. 21. I've not written unto you because ye know not the truth, but because ye know it. Ever seen so many times? Last verse. If ye know that he is righteous, ye know that every one that doeth righteousness is born of him. The next verse. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. The next verse. But we know that. Verse 5. And ye know that. Verse 6. Neither known him. And on and on and on through the whole epistle there. It's just incredible what's found. So, love as the new commandment versus love as the old commandment. In other words, we'll have to tie together the teachings of the Old and New Testament on love. And what is the new commandment? It can't be love, or could it be? And which one is the old one? And then how could this be the new one if the old one was also love? The old commandment's love, and what's the new commandment? Love. Well, then one can't be old and one be new. So that whole area will have to be discussed.